Thank you, Senator Tester. Senator Cramer of North Dakota is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you both for being here. Congratulations, Chairman Powell. I look forward, as do many of my colleagues, to supporting your confirmation. First thing I want to do, Mr. Chairman, is correct a record that got real fuzzy when Senator Kennedy asked Secretary Yellen a couple of times about debt and deficit, and she said that the Build Back Better plan is completely paid for, and to prove it, the point, she said the CBO agrees with her. Senator Daines touched on it, but I want to read directly from the Congressional Budget Office's score. CBO estimates that enhancing this legislation would result in a net increase in the deficit totaling $367 billion over the 2022 through 2031 period. That's the 10 years. Now, I've got the chart year by year. It's $155 billion next year alone, and it continues for 5 years. And then in the last 4, it shows some, turnaround. But of course, all of that 5 years of revenue or beyond the first 5 years is built on the premise that these programs aren't going to be continued, which we know any casual observer of American politics knows. Once these programs start, they're never going to be cut again. But even presuming that the presumptions built in, it's a $367 billion deficit according to the Congressional Budget Office's score on the Better Business or Build Back Better plan. Now, I want to get back to an earlier question Senator Menendez asked you, Secretary Yellen. Basically, he said, and would a lot of these programs in the Better Business or Build Back Better plan actually increase the workforce participation? Things like child tax credit, child care credit. You talked a little bit just now about Senator Tester called it workforce housing. You called it affordable housing. Important distinction, because those words matter a lot. So my question is, if all of those credits, all of those giveaways, all of those incentives are going to help increase workforce participation, is there a work requirement tied to all of those?
I'd like to start by correcting what I believe you said about the CBO.
Well, I didn't say it. I read the score from the Congressional Budget Office.
I'm sorry, but you didn't read it completely. It does say $360 billion over a 10-year effect on the deficit. It then notes that it did not include the revenue that would come from enhanced resources for tax enforcement. They estimated that at $207 billion and have indicated that their scoring of that does not take account of behavioral changes that would result from a regime of stricter tax enforcement, and Treasury put out its own estimate of that.
And fairy dust creates energy. I understand. But I want to get back to the issue of incentivizing a workforce. Are there workforce incentives, work requirements attached to the Build Back Better plan from the House?
There are places where there are not workforce requirements, like the child tax credit, but the vast majority, the overwhelming preponderance of individuals who receive these tax credits, the child tax credit, do work. And in some cases...
But we're talking about a workforce participation rate that needs to be increased. Do any of these incentives require people to work to get them, or is this just going to be added on to whatever they're already getting, regardless of their employment situation? They aren't, just so you know. There aren't. Earlier, Secretary Yellen, you answered a question from Chairman Brown about why Build Back Better does not increase inflation. Or actually, his question was, will it bring down costs? And you went on to explain all the ways that it brings down costs, except that you really didn't. In North Dakota, the inflation rate's over 7%. Over 7%. Because we appropriately last year stimulated the economy, both the legislative, the Congress, the President, the Federal Reserve through its policies. We did that appropriately, not knowing what the outcome was going to be. But by the time we got to early this year, The winds of inflation were already blowing, the economy was already expanding, and Democrats added $2 trillion more to debt and deficit, as well as stimulating the economy without any requirement on the other side. Now we're doing another, whatever it's going to be, $2 to $4 or $5 trillion that the Democrats are going to push through. And I know that my time is up, and I know that Chairman Powell doesn't ask questions about answer questions about pending legislation, at least not recently. So I'm going to ask him this. Do you know of any economists or reputable economic model where more stimulus of money into a situation reduces the cost of a product? It may, to be fair, Secretary Yellen, it may help people pay for some things, but the cost does not come down when there's more money. So, Chairman Powell, do you know of any economic model where costs come down when people have more money to spend on it?
It's really hard to answer that in the abstract. I mean, there are forms of really investment that create more capacity in the economy.
And I would agree with that, which is why I supported the infrastructure package. I think that invests in the infrastructure that moves an economy and pays people to work to build it and to use it rather than not pay them to work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Sinema is recognized from her office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Secretary Yellen and Chair Powell, it's good to speak with you both again. Arizonans are increasingly concerned about supply chain disruptions and inflation. As we know, global supply chains were and continue to be fragmented and dysfunctional due to the pandemic. In the bustle of the holiday season, families are frustrated to see delayed shipments and empty shelves. Ongoing disruptions